Hello, I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, and this is the Small Business Briefing. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And as you can see, I'm back downstate. Last week I was up at in Marquette, and all kinds of exciting things going on in Marquette. It was great to see some friends and members and spend some time with the business community in the Upper Peninsula. And as always, my co-conspirator in this endeavor is Sarah Miller. And Sarah, why don't you do our sponsor recognition today?
Hi, Brian. Glad to see you're back downstate. I think we'll connect in the office later this week. We're both working remotely today. But as always, it's Monday, and we want to give a big welcome to, or a big thank you, not a welcome, to Marana Group. Well, maybe welcome. I'm sure David Roy is tuning in, but a big thank you to Marana Group for their sponsorship and to David Roy. I was almost about to say, as always, we want to start with the numbers for Data Monday, but Brian, can you tell us a little bit about why we're going to switch things up this week and get into our first story about COVID restrictions kind of being dropped nationwide?
Yeah, so a lot of things are changing very quickly, and we've got a tradition. The tradition goes way back to the beginning of this briefing, where we start out with the numbers to do we call it Data Monday, and the numbers, looking at what's happening with COVID. But as those numbers in this last time have declined, and it feels a little different than it has in the past, we have decided that while we're still going to cover the data, it's still important and still kind of a risk factor to keep an eye on. We're going to put it at the back end of the program instead of in the beginning of Monday, and just as a signal that things are changing, that the emphasis of all of our lives around this issue of the pandemic and the risks around the pandemic are starting to move on, and that's true of the small business briefing as well. And now, a few weeks ago, or actually just last week, I think I had mentioned that I was a little bit surprised. I didn't expect that that a lot of these restrictions and recommendations here in the state and around the country would be dropped so quickly. I thought it would be, into the spring before that happened, maybe even late spring before we saw things move so quickly. But that has not been the case. It's been the case that many governments at the state and even creeping into the discussions at the federal level are ready to start moving on. And one of the illustrations of that is the fact that there are only 2 states remaining that have mask mandates for public places: New Mexico and Washington State. Both of them have now announced that those will be ending as well. So statewide or nationwide, there aren't broad mask mandates. There still are for healthcare and institutional living. A lot of individual, like universities, are still requiring it. But in terms of like state-imposed rules across the board, that the final 2 states are dropping those requirements now, and it's just I think just a good signal that things are changing. I also think there's something to do with the fact that we have elections coming up this year, and as citizens have increasingly been ready to move on and really aren't looking for the government to have so many controls and so much to say about people's day-to-day choices and how they're choosing to manage their own risk. You see the political system, or the government, which is really controlled by the political system, that is responding to that. So we see it happening on a lot of different levels. We saw last week here in Michigan the recommendation from Health and Human Services in the state of Michigan backing off on their indoor mask recommendations. And regulations, but recommendations. There still are, though, regulations for places like hospitals and congregate living facilities here in Michigan. But overall, even in our state, which has really been pretty strict on average over the last couple of years, backing off on those requirements. So it's starting to feel differently, and it's pretty obvious why. I mean, we see the numbers coming down very, very sharply, but you put that in the context of it being 2022, or a couple years into a pandemic now, and the tolerance for the things of the past have gotten to pretty close to zero, And therefore, I expect that we truly have entered a new phase of this, where Republicans and Democrats both are reluctant to try and hold on to some of the controls and restrictions of the past.
So as we kind of move into this phase of no COVID restrictions, what do you see happening here in Michigan with the state employees and the return to in-person work? I know some state employees are back to work, but I know you and I have both commented downtown Lansing just isn't the same as it used to be. So can we expect to see a little bit more of a vibrant community downtown anytime soon?
A lot of the bigger employers, including the state of Michigan, have finally started to either call employees back to the office, the workplace itself, from remote work, or to announce intentions to do that. And so where people watching this may or may not know, but SBAM, the Small Business Association of Michigan, our headquarters, our main location where our employees are, well, pre-pandemic, we're always located, is right downtown Lansing. So Washington Square, which is right by the Capitol, a downtown, a pretty traditional looking downtown business district, has really cratered over the last 2 years. And a big part of that, of course, is the employment base of the state of Michigan being gone. When the governor was at a Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce meeting, it was either last week or maybe late the week before, she was asked about this. What about getting state employees back in the office and kind of, bringing back that action, that activity to the downtown business district? And the governor, while she didn't give any details with it, said that she does want to call state employees back. Now, as you might imagine, I've got a lot of friends in state government, and so I was just kind of curious. I called some friends and just said, "Hey, what's going on in your area? Are you getting signals that there will be a more robust return to the office than what we've seen here in the past?" And the answer I got was yes, there are signals coming from a lot of different ways to get ready. In some places, actually putting dates in the future in some departments and divisions of state government, and others that may not have a date certain yet, but have been told that it's coming. And now that probably doesn't mean 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. It probably isn't going to be a return to totally pre-pandemic type of work arrangements, because really nobody's doing that. But the idea of having state offices in the downtown business district filled with those office workers again seems more likely than before. And then again, as you look across the landscape, these bigger companies that create a market for smaller businesses, retail and restaurant and hospitality in downtown business districts all across the state, do appear to be moving. And they've done this before. Like, we've heard this before. It's like, well, we're coming back, and then they cancel in waves and back and forth. But there is something different that is happening now. There's something different about this Omicron wave, where it kind of hit everywhere and substantially enough. And there just seems to be growing confidence that this desire to kind of move back toward having people together again, the employees of any particular organization spending some time together again, that's in our future and getting pretty close.
All right. Well, as we're talking about economic impacts, there's been a couple studies out recently that are talking about how Michigan is doing as an economy overall, but they're completely different in their assessment. So give us a little insight there.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated when I saw last week two different perspectives on Michigan's recovery that used basically the same data set and came to radically different conclusions about how well Michigan is doing. And all the way from number 1, as in the best, all the way through to number 42, so top 10 worst. And in terms of our recovery, and one was Bloomberg, and then the other one was Wallet Hub, which we've used a lot of those rankings in the past. It's very objective, just taking a look at objective official data and ranking things. And in this case, really, there's both of these rankings looked at the same type of thing, and they said basically with a big emphasis on employment, so employment recovery throughout the pandemic. And I wanted to share just quickly the first. The first is was Bloomberg. Now, Bloomberg, looking at this, it says much better than average. Actually, put Michigan in their rankings at #1, and so you see the U.S. This is the employment growth since April of 2020. In Michigan, you see a lot sharper in the beginning, and then kind of follows the national trend. And so I found this pretty interesting. When at the same time, I saw the Wallet Hub ranking, which essentially used the same data, a little bit different in how they rank things, or in terms of the weights that they put on different things, but basically the same data set, and said, no, Michigan is number 42. And so as I dug into it, it's really a matter of timing. And that timing comes down to when they compare when they compare as like the baseline. So if I were to look at the Bloomberg, they start in April of 2020. What they say is they're ranking in essentially right here in this graph, you're seeing employment growth since the low point of employment. Remember, we've looked at all kinds of graphs and it shows that things dropped like a rock through April. And then by the time May rolled around, things were coming back. People were getting called back in Michigan. Manufacturing, for example, was called back. And that's what you see right here. Even manufacturing was closed in April, but by May, it got reopened. Look at this huge jump was because manufacturing that got closed down got reopened. And so in much of the rest of the country, there was never that, it didn't close down as much as it did in Michigan. And so that jump was big. But if you look at Wallet Hub, they don't compare it to April of 2020. They look at December 31st, 2019. So what they're saying is, how is Michigan doing since before the pandemic? So if you go back a quarter before the pandemic started, how is Michigan doing in terms of its overall recovery, especially employment growth? And it ranks more toward the back. And so it begs the question, like, who's right in this? And it gives you a good sense, though, for how different things can be using the conclusion can be using different data sets. So if you wanted to, if you were to argue in favor of the Bloomberg data, you would say, well, the pandemic hit everywhere and it hit different states harder than others. And you can't blame any particular state for the pandemic because it's not any state's fault that the pandemic happened. And therefore, it's fair to start there, assuming that all states were affected in the same way by the pandemic. Therefore, that's the logical place to start your analysis. Now, others would argue that that you really have to go pre-pandemic because the decisions that states made had an impact, some impact, you might even say profound impact on the overall economic downside of the closures. And so when you go down further, the idea there's more upside, right? So it was the same reason why we had explosive growth in Michigan in 2010, 11, and 12 was because we had fallen so far down in 2007, 8, 9. And so the denominator of the fraction got really small. So the growth on top of that looked really big. It's the same thing when you look at things starting in April. So April of 2020. So both of those things have some truth to them, but really, if you think that states really had no choice and the impact of the pandemic really was something that's no state or decision makers in the state's fault, you'd say, well, the Bloomberg ranking would make sense. But if you think that that states' decisions and how they managed the pandemic had a lot to do with how the overall recovery should be judged, it would make more sense to to measure things from before the pandemic started. And but even there's some flaws with even that, because some states were stronger than other states in 2019. So when I looked at that ranking, Florida didn't look too good, but I knew that Florida looks strong now, and they looked strong in 2019. Well, the fact that they were pretty strong then means they had less upside to go. So that, when you pick these dates to start, makes a big difference in how things look. So my guess is that you'll see Governor Whitmer and her team in her reelection hold up the Bloomberg report, and you'll see her opponents hold up the Wallet Hub report. And so, as in the pandemic or in the political world, of course, people are going to want to point to the things that that impact their, that make them look better or worse, depending on your perspective. But it makes sense really to understand why. You see these rankings very rarely is it as straightforward as saying, here's a ranking and that's how it is. It's one way of looking at it. It makes sense to look at it from multiple perspectives.
I was just going to say, thank you for bringing us a fresh perspective and a way to think about these things outside of just the headlines that are written. Kind of related to this, we published an article in our newsletter this morning, the Small Business Weekly, or rather this afternoon, around the sense of where have all the employees gone. This idea of a workforce shortage, a labor shortage, is not new to our members or to the viewers here. Clearly, it's a top issue that small businesses are dealing with. And part of the article showed that the number of independent workers surged 34% in 2021. So up from 38 million in 2020 to 51 million last year. So what can we make of this?
The thing I really liked about this data set coming in is that it brought into focus some other data that we've paid attention to in the past. So there was a, we've seen the labor force participation rate fall, 20-year trend where it's been falling generally for 20 years, but more dramatic through the pandemic. We've seen certain categories, people leaving, certain demographics leaving the workforce, younger employees with kids, especially women, and also older employees retiring. We've seen the Great Resignation with people moving around. We've seen record new business starts over the last year, especially, and very impressive numbers in new business starts. And then we see the independent contractor, the 1099 employee, the rise in 2021, and very, very impressive growth. So as you had mentioned, a 34% increase, up to 51 million people that are in this category now. And most of them are going to be operating with a tax ID number. So like this new business starts, part of the reason that we're seeing increased new business starts, it makes sense if you have this much of a rise in independent contractors. And so that is it's part of the answer of where people have gone, is that, they've just decided that they want maximum independence. And so they're moving away from in those types of jobs, report that they are interested or they are considering doing independent contract work themselves. And so it's a trend that looks like it might continue. So a really big jump up this year, and no reason to believe that it will not continue in the future. So what does this mean for our members? You might, if you have people on the team that could do 1099 work, you might want to gauge out how those employees are feeling about the way that they're doing their work today. But also, if you're having a hard time filling positions, then maybe a different type of a structure would be the way to go. It's one thing that it's been very clear that people in the government sector do not understand is how many small businesses. People think of small businesses, they think of restaurants and small retail shops, and of course those, there are a lot of small businesses that do that, but there's actually more small businesses that are providing professional services on a 1099 basis, and so that's with that continuing to grow, it's probably going to be a more relevant factor for more businesses and how they operate in the future, given this longer term trend, but again, really ramped up through the pandemic trend toward people just wanting more flexibility and control over their own destiny, how and when they work. And this is an outgrowth of that.
Yes, I think one thing is for sure is that the landscape of work has probably changed forever. And a quick thank you to our partners, the American Society of Employers, for providing us with that article. All right, next up on the list of topics today is gas prices. A few months ago, President Biden released fuel from the National Reserves, and now there is talk of a gas tax holiday. So what does that mean?
Yeah, this is I would put this in the gimmick category, just like the releasing fuel from the reserves, meant to short term bring a little bit of relief, but won't actually change any of the issues, the underlying issues that could result from sustained high fuel prices. Now, if you might recall back, we talked previously about the entrepreneurship scorecard. And in the scorecard, we looked at some of the factors that contributed to previous recessions. And one of the hallmarks of the last two recessions before the pandemic was sustained high energy prices. And so that contributes to cost in a lot of different ways and can have a dampening impact on the economy. And we've seen that, at least a strong correlation, but maybe causation in the past. So the politicians are very concerned about this, that, naturally, on the one hand, there's been some policies that contributed to higher gas prices and fuel prices. But then on the other hand, there is, you see this, this political downside or fallout from it. And so releasing gas from the reserves was one of the things that one of the approaches taken, but just like we said before, that have a short-term impact and then things jump right back up. That's in fact what happened. In this case, the idea of a gas tax holiday, it would make a very, very short-term impact, however long they cut the taxes down on gasoline. But it's not like the federal government is going to cut back on road projects. In fact, it's one of the things that probably most people wouldn't want to see them cut back on, is the maintenance and construction budgets for roads and bridges. So if they did do a gas tax holiday or a short-term cut in gas taxes, it would impact things a little bit for a little while, and then they jump back up. And so the cynic in me would say, yeah, it's I guess a halfway decent election year strategy, but not a sustainable approach. And really, just from a good governance standpoint, would really much rather see them focus on the types of policies that could impact the cost of fuel and energy long term, as opposed to things that could kind of just get them through the next election cycle, particularly if it's going to cause additional deficit spending, which we're kind of paying the price for today as well. So there are some big issues that are facing the country right now, and a lot of uncertainty out there, right? Rising costs, inflation, supply chain issues seem to be healing some and improving somewhat. And the workforce shortage, all these things that we've been talking about. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, but also some there really are, with the end of this the pandemic phase, and maybe into this period where we've got less government rule or government imposition of rules. It feels like maybe we're gonna to hit a good place here in the future, but like I say, just getting past the gimmickry in the response to things, and just being real, direct, and focused on longer term solutions, I think will do a lot of good, because there's demand out there, and the economy wants to fully get going and to grow. And if we can remove some of these hardships in the way of that growth, I think we could have some strong years in front of us. But even with that feeling and the good wishes there, I think it's going to be a pretty complicated year ahead.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and look at the numbers in our new end of the show Data Monday report.
All right. So we have more of the same, basically, and this is good. Generally good news, I think, across the board. We have this is the U.S. numbers. That's really sharp up, really sharp down. This is what we saw in the other countries that were ahead of the U.S. and so in pretty good shape. The looking at the heat map around the country, you see Michigan actually numbers ours were higher than a lot of places. Right now, it's Kentucky that's highest in the country, and but that West Virginia and Tennessee still generally high. But across the board, you see all of the regions of the country coming down at similar rates and to similar places. This is a difference between before. Before, we had different regions that were very, very different when they were going up and when they were going down. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why some of the epidemiologists are more confident that Omicron is different, is because it's like this wave of natural immunity across the whole population, practically of the world, at the same time. And that's different than the other waves that we've experienced, where it's kind of moved slowly through different places. Hospitalizations coming down just as steeply as the numbers, this again nationwide, and then ICU numbers coming down as well. And then finally, deaths coming down. This is the lagging indicator, still frankly pretty high, but again, clearly made the turn, and we would expect this number to drop very sharply in the coming weeks. And then looking at Michigan's numbers, you'll see that this is a very dramatic drop down to really to levels that we haven't seen since early October, and no signs that it's going to stop dropping. I mean, it really looks like it's on its way down. The question is, will we have a spring, any kind of spring reprisal? Not a lot of people are talking about that being a possibility, whereas they were this time last year. Looking at hospitalization in Michigan, again, dropping very, very quickly, and ICUs dropping, and inpatient or intensive care units. That's a good sign. And then looking at deaths in Michigan, dropping pretty steeply too. So all of these things together, I think, point to us being in a much better position. And again, the predictions about the future are the part that seems different now, that there aren't too many of the scientists out there and the epidemiologists that are saying, hey, just around the corner, we've got another variant that's going to, cause all kinds of problems and havoc. It's really kind of quiet, eerily quiet on that front, but good news all around.
If you're superstitious, now might be the time to, I don't know, knock on wood or throw some salt over your shoulder. But all right, well, we're about out of time for today. I do want to let you all know that next week on March 2nd, we're hosting a conversation on workplace trends. It's with our member Space Inc. along with Hayworth. And the conversation is about sustainability and the impact on your business. So I encourage you to go to the site at sbam.org/events to check that event out, as well as others coming up. We all have a great week, and we'll see you back here on Thursday.
See you on Thursday, everybody.